good morning and welcome ladies and gentlemen. Today we are entering into the 17th lecture of this course. The title of the lecture is Phases in Research Design. For a few lectures we have started discussing the research design, and there would be various aspects of the phases of the research design would be discussed. So, in this lecture we shall be discussing the phases in research design. What do we mean by phases? As we now are very clear that the research is a scientific process. It's a systematic process. It is done a step by a step. So, every aspect of this research has to be dealt with in the same manner, and this is why today we shall be discussing the phases in research designing, that is what we have to first, then what we have to second do in the second step, then what we have to do in the third, and like this, so and so on. So, the first thing that we are going to do is the specifying of the problem, that is topic to be studied, which is the basic thing and includes the defining of the problem also. Then after that we have to come to the framing of the research design, how research design would be developed. Then we proceed to the planning of sample design, that is probability or combination, that is whether either probability sample or non-probability sample or a mixed variety of these. This we have to decide, and of course this should be decided separately for each problem of the study. There is no universal thing that one sample design is enough for all the researches. No, it depends upon the type of research that we are going to pursue, and this dictates our choice of the sample design. Whether we are going to choose one of the probability designs, or whether we are going to choose one of the non-probability designs, or whether we are going to choose a mixture or combination of the two, it all depends upon the type of research problem, nature of the research problem that the researcher has undertaken to do research upon. Then the next phase comes is the collection of data. We collect the data. There are various methods of collection of the data. First, it has to be decided what kind of data one should have, and once it is decided, then again depending upon the nature of the problem, again depending upon the kind of problem that the researcher has undertaken, he or she has to decide which design for the collection of the data. Whether it is to be interview method, questionnaire schedule method, or observation method, or any other type of methods, that has to be settled, planned before the beginning of the research while developing the research design. And then comes the process of processing of the data, editing, coding, classification, tabulation. These are the steps of processing of the data. The data has to be treated in the processing method to make it easily understandable, to make it very easy for any reader or anyone who wants to go through this type of research. And then we have to analyze the data. Which kind of analysis? It again depends upon the problem of research. In exploratory or formulative research, we cannot do hypothesis testing. Rather, in this type of research, hypothesis, many times hypothesis is outcome of the research. So, the analysis depends upon again upon the nature of the problem. And if it is hypothesis testing research or experimental research, then of course we have to set up the hypothesis and test the hypothesis. So, in testing of the hypothesis again, whether which kind of analysis we are going to adopt, whether it is t-test, z-test, or we try to find correlation, or we want to regress the dependent variable and independent variables and find relations. So, this again the decision for the choice of analytic framework again depends upon the nature of problem that we have or the researcher has undertaken. The next step or phase comes of the preparation of the report, that this report has to be written, how it has to be written, what kind of referencing style, bibliography style would be adopted. These are done in advance in the research designing process. The research design itself would spell the kind of how the report would be prepared, with what kind of referencing styles and other things. Some scholars talk only of 4 phases in any research, that is the problem selection phase, which means that the selection of the problem, defining of the problem, whereas for them the next stage is the phase is the research design phase, which includes all the steps in the research design. And then comes the empirical phase, which means the collection of data, and also which means analysis of the data. And the final is the interpretive phase, meaning to how to write the report. So if we compare these two, we will find that these are similar, because this also encompasses all of the phases that we discussed earlier. So broadly these are same. Now we will elaborate the research process or the phases of the research design by identify the steps of the quantitative research. They should be in detail. What is that? The first step comes from specifying the problem to be studied. The problem is based either on one's own interest or any idea coming from any theory. So the idea might come from a theory, say Durkheim's theory of suicide and social integration, or Keynes' Keynesian consumption theory, or any other theory, or the level analysis in international relations. Any theory, whether it is in economics or education or sociology or political science or the other subjects. Some people are very much impressed by Marxian theories. So they get an idea of research from these theories. They can, of course, they can proceed with the idea which has come to their mind. Suppose somebody wants to check whether the Keynesian consumption theory works in case of a metropolitan city like Delhi or not. So this has come to his mind, cropped up in his mind, and he can pursue it. The Marx says that, Karl Marx says that the mode of production determines the social relations, whether the mode of production is agrarian or industrial or service oriented. His contention is that this determines the social relations, and his theory or his thesis is a subject of study all over the world. So, if somebody wants to study this, say in the context of, say, a region, and wants to check its veracity, then this issue has cropped in his mind, and he would get interested and committed to it. So, the issue has come through his own interest. Or if somebody wants to study India's relations with Gulf Cooperation Council countries, because he has come to know that there is a strong economic partnership between India and these countries, or he has some other kind of interest. So, this has cropped in his mind, and he would keep this topic very dear to him. So, what I mean to say that this has come, interest has come from the idea of the research, has come through his own mind, either through the theory or from himself, his own interest or her own interest, by going through the literature or by any other interest. Also, the researches are sponsored. The sponsoring agencies wants to study the topics which are so important for the society, which are very important for the society and for the country. So, they sponsor such kind of researches. Say, the problem of drug abuse. So, the government and the ministry is very much concerned about the drug problem which is affecting the youth of this country, spoiling their life and future. So, the say Ministry of Social Welfare, Government of India, may sponsor a research on drug addiction, and those who have the background of working or who have background of training to work on such topics, they have to apply, and if the sponsoring agency finds them suitable, then they have to do research over for these topics. So, or suppose if the government of India, the Ministry of External Affairs, they want somebody to study whether the various schemes for the Indian expatriate workers, when they come back from their countries, is beneficial to them or not, is reaching to them or not, is supportive to them or not when they return back from those countries by leaving their jobs, and whether it is helpful for them to settle their life by after coming back, after returning from the the Gulf countries. So this would be sponsored by the Ministry the of the External Affairs. So the researcher has been given this topic, Indian Council of Social Science Research or the DST or other funding agencies, sponsoring agencies. They know and they have their own requirements of research, and they support, they sponsor the researchers for to pursue this kind of research. Next is the research objectives. We have already discussed in one lecture the objectives of research. So, this is also one phase in the research design. These objectives depend on whether the research is exploratory, formulative, descriptive, diagnostic, or experimental, or hypothesis testing research. However, as we have very clearly mentioned before, that there is no research without objectives. The objectives have to be spelled very clearly, and this would help us also in setting up of the hypothesis in the next phases. So, the objectives also are to be taken seriously. These are to be set up and discussed again and again with the experts, especially with the supervisor of the researcher. A set of objectives delineates the type of information that needs to be collected. In other words, this determines the scope of the research. So, the research objectives are also very necessary. Then the third step is specifying the concepts, because we use in research various kinds of concepts. We have to explain this so that either the researcher or those who go through this research are not confused, they are very clear. Suppose we are discussing or we are doing research on drug abuse, then we have to clear the what we mean by these concepts like drug abuse, narcotic drugs, withdrawal syndrome, etc. If we are working on, say, the adjustment of a convicted person in prison, then also we have to explain these concepts very clearly. If we are working on, say, caste or class, then also we have to clearly explain these concepts. If we are working on rural urban, or if we are working on, say, the gender or any kind of research, then all the researches, they in fact require that the concepts that would be used are explained very clearly. And also we have to identify, the researcher has to identify the variables which are going to be used in our research: education, family structure, parental control, peers relations, domestic policy, foreign policy, primary education, secondary education, higher education. This all has to be identified. Income, consumption, or all the variables we are going to use either as dependent or either as independent must be identified. We should identify what is the concept of joint family. We should explain what do we mean by development, globalization, violence against women, youth, subculture, and so forth, because these have to be very clear. Then the next step is framing hypothesis. It makes the objective of a study as well as many concepts very clear. It flows from the objectives. The hypothesis is a statement pertaining to the relationship between two variables that can be refuted or supported by the data. We set up the hypothesis of relations and then we test it for either accepting or rejecting. So, if we want to study, say, the impact of parental income on the educational status of children, then we have to set up the hypothesis accordingly. Here the parental income is independent variable, whereas the the status of or the success of children is dependent variable. We have to see, does any relation exist between the two? The relation may exist, the relation may not exist. There may be a relation between income of the parent and educational achievement of the children, and there may not be a relation between income of the parent and achievement of the children. This has to be tested. We would set up the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and then after the testing process, we find what exactly, where does exactly this relation stands. So, that is the hypothesis. The next step, when already objectives have been specified and hypothesis has been framed, this step is the choosing of or taking decision of the methods and procedure for collecting and analyzing the data and planning the sample, which includes deciding the sample size. So, this is also a very important step, that we have to not only select a sample and make clear what sample design would be in our research, but also we have to clearly explain, and we have to clearly explain in the design what type of methods of collection of data we are going to adopt. And remember that it is not at the whims of the researcher. How does he go in any of these steps, not only in selection of the design of the sample or selection of the process or the method of collection of the data. Everything in research proceeds logically. There has to be logical basis of adopting the particular sampling method, and there has to be logical basis for adopting a particular method of collection of the data. So, we have to decide it in the design itself, and sometime we have to decide for more than one methods of collection of the data also. These all depends upon the type of research that the researcher is pursuing, and any decision which the researcher takes has to be supported by logical grounds. There is nothing like unilateral decision by the researcher in research. No. As much qualitative or superior we want for our research, as much it has to be logical procedure. The next step is the take sampling. It deals with the questions of whom to study and how many to study. The most simple form of sample size takes into consideration the total population and level of significance, because if suppose the population is a small, say only 100, then there is no need for sample. But if suppose the whole population where we have to make the study is say 40,000, then we have to go for a sample. And we cannot manage to do 40,000 questionnaires. We cannot manage to do 20,000 questionnaire or 20,000 questionnaire or 10,000 questionnaire. We have to decide upon the sample size and the level of significance. This we shall be discussing in detail when we have discussion on the determination of the size of the sample. At this time, we restrict ourselves to saying that the sample size has to take into consideration the size of the population and the level of significance of the study which we have decided. Then the next step is the empirical phase, which includes data collection and data processing. The data has to be collected and data has to be processed. The primary data has to be collected through questionnaire, schedule, observation or interview methods, or even by using two or more of these methods, whereas the secondary data has to be collected from the government records, newspapers, journals, books, etc., etc. We have to discuss this all separately in various lectures, but here now we restrict ourselves to saying that the primary data and secondary data has to be collected through one or more than one scientific methods. Then the next is the interpretive phase, that is analyzing the data and drawing conclusions. Giving generalizations and testing the hypothesis. So, this is the eighth step or eighth phase. This also we have to clearly mention in our plan, which we call research design. In our blueprint of research, which we also call the research design. These, how we have to analyze the data, how we have to draw the conclusion, how we have to interpret it and generalize it. This all has to be explained very clearly in a smaller Then in a sponsored study, the researcher must also design time schedule for various stages of research and budget he requires to cover the total cost, because after all the time is limited and the budget is also limited. That has to be a consideration, also a consideration in writing or in developing the research design. That is very important, crucial rather. So, in short, in brief, the design of the structure of the basis or the basic elements of the design is as follows. Number 1, stating the problem, that is to show whether it will be descriptive, explanatory, action or theoretical research, and how it would contribute to the development of society and academics or the nation and the country. Also, one has to review the studies which have already been done on and around the thesis of research or topic of the research. This would help us in fact help us a lot in developing our perspective and ideas, and of course finding the gap of the research. Then operationalization of the concepts, that is giving a specific meanings to terms, that is political elite, development, subculture, prisonation, etc. Then identifying variables of a study, that is pointing out key variables in the study and methods of measurement. Fixing the sample, that is deciding the number of subjects from whom the data is to be collected and how these subjects are to be chosen. And then sixth is the specifying the tools of the study, how the questionnaire schedule, whether questionnaire method, schedule method, interview, observation, or it would be case study, survey study, field study or experimental study. These are also to be decided in the design itself. And also whether we have also to mention in the design whether any statistical test has to be conducted, and if it is so, then which kind of the statistical formulas or statistical instruments we have to choose for the study of this problem. Also, and if not so, then we have to specify the type of the logical analysis we are going to adopt for our study, and of course, we have to provide the various stages describing time to devote to each stage. If it is an ICSR sponsored research, then they distribute it quarterly and we have to give quarterly reports that how we are doing our research. Even now there are research advisory committees for each of the research scholars, and they assess the development, the progress in the research every semester or every 6 months, and that is a committee. So this is why we have to give the time schedule of our research in our research research design, and the budget, of course, the not only UGC which gives scholarships and fellowships to the research scholars, but other sponsoring agencies like ICSSR or CSIR or the DST, these or the ministries, they, for them a budget has to be presented to for and specifying the all heads of expenditures what the budget would be. The budget should neither be very much inflated, because this would put your or our proposal uh, in a non-competitive situation, whereas those who have given a balanced budget, they would be preferred. And we should not lower the budget also very much, because if it is accepted, then with meager or low budget we cannot perform the research. So in brief, we we come we have discussed the various phases in which research design has to be developed and has to be implemented. I am sure that I have been able to clear these this this issue or this topic to you very well. Thank you very much.